let's get right into today's question, which is, my husband is on my back all the time. I'm not doing this right, I'm not doing that right. He's turning into a criticism machine. Got any suggestions? And the question comes from Peg, and Peg, by the way, thank you for the question. Now, there's a number of places we could jump into this question. For instance, we could talk about the phrase all the time. And we could certainly talk for hours about the phrase doing this right or doing that right. But it seems like the gist of Peg's question really has to do with the whole concept of criticism. So let's start there and let's explore that in today's session of Q&A+. So let's look at a key concept related to criticism. And let's ease our way into it by looking at another concept that we're all very familiar with. Apples and oranges. Now, we know that apples and oranges are both fruit, and yet in reality they are also very different. That's why we use the phrase apples and oranges to represent something that is quite different from each other. And this is quite common. We know that, for instance, deciduous trees and evergreen trees they're both trees, but they're also very different kinds of trees. We know that football and rugby have a lot of similarities, and yet they are also quite different in their own ways. So the key piece here is that when we talk about criticism, we want to contrast it with correction. So the key concept here is there is criticism, there is correction. Let's look at them both, and let's start with correction. So let's start with an example of correction. Let's say you're helping your 8-year-old son with his multiplication tables, and you ask, Billy, what is 8 times 7? And Billy thinks for a minute, and he says, 63. And you say, that's close, let's try it again. Billy thinks again, comes up with 56, that's right. Or another example, maybe you're helping your older daughter, and you ask her, Sally, what is the capital of China? She says, Shanghai. And you say, no, that's not correct. The correct answer is actually Beijing. No problem. You ask something, people respond, they make a mistake, and you correct them for their mistake. Now let's take the same example from the point of view of criticism. So you ask Billy, what's 8 times 7? Billy says, 63. And you say, oh, God, your sister would know this. Or you say, boy, you're not studying. If you don't know your multiplication tables, you're not going to get into college. You're not going to get a good job. You're not going to make money. You're probably going to be homeless the rest of your life. Or you go, roll your eyes. You really don't know? We've been working on this for a week now. That's the criticism. Or same thing if you would do it with Sally, your daughter, the same kind of responses, the same kind of body language that indicates you're not just correcting your child, but you are criticizing your child. And the same is true whether we're talking about children or an adult. It is one thing to correct somebody because we are human beings. We all make mistakes. Heck, businesses make mistakes, governments make mistakes, religious institutions make mistakes. It's part of being alive. And so life in many ways is a process of mistake, correction, mistake, correction, mistake, correction. The problem in terms of relationships is when we come from a place of criticism, when whether it's in our words or whether it's in our tone of voice or whether it's in our body language, we are criticizing the person, which implies in one way or another that we're right, they're wrong. We're smart, they're stupid. We're strong, they're weak. Any of those kind of distinctions that puts us as being, us the criticizer, as being better than in some way the person who is being criticized. And that becomes very damaging. And it's often very difficult to sort out, is this instance of criticism, just as there's a lot of pressure right now on me as the person doing the criticizing? Or is it a whole pattern of behavior that is implied in Peg's question? We'll get back to that in a moment. The key piece here, though, is to remember that it's important to sort out correction versus criticism. What are we doing? Or what is the other person doing? It's important to look at where does that come from in us if we are the person doing the criticizing. And lastly, very, very important, it's critical to think about what are the implications of our being critical. So if we are critical of Billy or we're critical of Sally once or twice, never mind a whole pattern that they grow up with, what are the long-term consequences to them? Because whacking a person in the head, if you will, which is what repeated criticism is not really any different than whacking a child on the side of the head physically. There are going to be longer-term consequences. So, Peg, getting back to your question, you asked for a few suggestions. Here are 3 of them. The first one is to look at what's going on in your husband's life. Meaning, is there something situational, something recent, something new, for instance, financial pressure, medical pressure, that's creating stress on him? And what is happening is he's not as sharp as he used to be or could be in terms of relationships, and it's coming out in the form now of criticizing you because he's under a great deal of pressure. And then if that is true, then that in itself becomes something to talk about. The second one is to look and ask yourself, is there something going on in your relationship with your husband? Is there distance there? Are there secrets? Are there lies that have been going on that you think? Are you suspecting an affair? Is there something going on that's created a lot of tension or distance between you? And that's really the issue. And there's something that needs to be talked about. Yeah, he's criticizing you, and you're probably doing something that's upsetting him. But is there some deeper issue that the 2 of you really need to talk about? Because often that is the case where a person starts to criticize. It's not their basic pattern, it's not their instinct, but they've started into a certain pattern behavior that is damaging. Is there something already deeper in the relationship that the 2 of you need to address? And the third one is to really ask yourself, and I'm not saying this is true in your case or any individual's case, but it certainly is the case in many instances. Is there something going on with you that you're really unhappy in this marriage, and unconsciously, because I doubt you would do this consciously, people don't generally, you are doing things that are ticking him off. And when he gets repeatedly ticked off, therefore, that then comes out in the form of criticism. So there's a dynamic going on that things are happening in the relationship, and therefore you're unhappy, and therefore you do this, and then he does that, and it just snowballs that way. And that in itself becomes something that needs to be talked about. So the key point here is, while your question is a couple of sentences long, there's really a great deal to look at here. There's usually much more in a relationship than meets the eye. What I would really suggest here is that you look at what's going on with your husband right now, what's going on with you right now, what's going on in the relationship right now, and that then becomes the basis for a conversation between the 2 of you so that you can correct, not criticize the relationship, but correct the relationship so you can then rebuild whatever trust and love that you